Let's talk about Colossal. This is a movie that was released in 2017, starring Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis and a few other names that you might know. And if you haven't heard of it, there's a reason for that, which is they didn't make very much money. The film made about 4.5 million at the box office. It's now available to stream, it's on Netflix, it's on Amazon. Okay, let's talk about the plot. Anne Hathaway plays a woman called Gloria, who is an alcoholic and gets kicked out of her apartment by her boyfriend called Tim. She's played by Dan Stevens. She moves back to her old town. Although she moves back to her family house, it's clear that she doesn't have any family in the area, and the movie doesn't go too deep into that. But she does run into her old school friend, Oscar. He gives her a job at the bar that he owns. And Gloria is basically trying to work out her life and what she is going to do now. And whilst all that is going on, you've got a monster rampaging through the streets of Seoul in South Korea. And there's a mysterious connection between Anne Hathaway and this big monster. And if that sounds like a mess of a movie, I promise you it's not. This movie, one of the most surprising things about it is how consistent it is. And coherent as a movie. It meshes this small-scale story of a woman moving home, trying to figure out what she's going to do, with a gigantic monster movie and thriller. And we're going to talk today about why I think it works. It feels like an emotional movie. It feels like an indie movie. There's always a focus on the humans at the centre of the story. Now today, as well as talking about this movie in general and why I think it's good, I also want to go into the themes of the movie. This movie has quite a small cast. Anne Hathaway is our main protagonist, and she is in pretty much every scene of the movie. There are small clips where she's not present, but apart from that, she's there. So in that way, she kind of carries this movie, and she grounds the absurdity of the plot. She kind of makes you believe and makes you care in what's happening on screen, whether it's her having a conversation with someone she knows, or if it's a monster that is destroying a building. The camera focuses on her reactions to things, and we find out things at the same time as she does. So, for example, she wakes up one morning and she sees the footage of the monster, and she reacts like she's witnessing something real. So the situation felt that much more important to me. Also, another thing to say is that Anne Hathaway gets a lot to do in the movie. So she gets to be curious, suspicious, angry, playful. She's very good, what can I say? She is usually one of, if not the best part of any movie she's in, and this movie is no different. Gloria is quite a complex character as well, which makes you root for her so much more. She's a good person at heart, she's understanding, she's caring, and but she's also messy, she's an alcoholic, she's self-aware about that as well. And Jason Sudeikis is, he gets a part which on the surface is quite simplistic, and he does that very convincingly. He shifts between moods in a way that feels like he's still playing the same character. So looking at the other characters in the movie, and the ones who get slightly less screen time, they aren't as complex characters as Gloria or Oscar, but they do help give the movie a bit of extra weight. Dan Stevens as Gloria's ex. He's basically the caring and judgmental ex-boyfriend. Dan Stevens is good at getting the best out of the dialogue. So in one scene when Tim is calling Gloria after she's moved back to her hometown, he says, "I don't mean to pry, but I don't know what you're actually doing there." That line and his performance gives a bit of extra context about the dynamic between him and Gloria, how he views Gloria. Anne Hathaway, her reaction to that shows you how she views Tim, and that relationship between the two of them. Oscar's two friends, played by Austin Stowell and Tim Blake Nelson, they are good at reacting as people who are overwhelmed by the unfolding events to do with the monster and Gloria. There are lots of scenes in the movie which feature them reacting in a very quiet way. They're afraid, but they don't say anything necessarily. Let's move on to directing. This movie was directed by Nacho Vigalondo. The directing aspect of the movie may not get as much attention as other parts of it, because it's not very sharp. I didn't notice the directing in the movie very much, as in the actual mechanics of it. But looking back on it, there's a definite choice to focus on personal moments alongside or over the big blockbuster shots of the monster. Now, that could be to do with the fact that the movie has a small budget, but there's going to have been a choice about what to focus on. By showing the personal moments and focusing, that is one of the main reasons I connected with the film. There are also subtle shots in the movie that are done with very good timing to make you feel the impact. There is one scene where Gloria feels defeated, and then she gets an idea. And that shot could just be done with her sitting at a chair and thinking, aha, I know what to do. But the movie doesn't go for that. It goes for something with that bit more impact. So her standing up out of shot, so she just suddenly appears in shot. There's also the element of screenwriting. Having just done a quick Google search, Nacho Vigalondo also did the screenwriting for the movie, as well as the directing. As I said earlier, we only really spend time with Gloria in the movie. It could be a small thing, but it means that the impact of reveals or moments in the movie is greater because we don't know about it in advance. The score is another element which hammers home the themes and the story of the movie. It moves between being a score for an indie movie and a score for a thriller and a disaster movie, which really helps with the movie juggling these two, that the score also juggles these two. There are moments in the movie where the score is similar to the score for a disaster movie or a thriller, and there are no monsters on screen and there are no big action scenes on screen, and that really drives the tension home. As a whole, I think the movie is more complex than you might think. It's more entertaining than you might think. It's got better acting, better writing, better directing than you think a mashup of this kind would have. There are some criticisms though. Until the last 20 minutes of the film, perhaps, I really liked the pacing in this movie. I liked the way that the mystery unfolded, Gloria uncovered more, and then her and other characters dealt with the fallout of it. In the last 20 minutes of the film, however, the pace really picks up and it's as if the events go into fast forward. It was a bit jarring in the context of the rest of the movie, which up to that point had a very consistent pace to it. The other criticism I'd make is the CGI, but only towards the end of the movie. For the most part, the CGI is pretty good. The difference is that towards the end of the movie, there is a CGI monster in the same shot as a real-life human actor. They just don't gel together and it completely takes you out of the scene. I think the emotional build up towards that point in the movie and the fact that it still focuses on the emotions of the characters in that scene means that you don't get completely taken out of the story, but the sense of tension went away for me in that scene. All of the elements I've talked about result in Colossal being able to handle the emotions of the characters very, very well. It does that, and it does that throughout the movie. The other strength this movie has is, for the most part, being able to create a sense of tension throughout. So the acting, the score, the direction that focuses on the reactions and the faces of the characters make you feel that tension a lot more than it could have otherwise done. And so you have this movie that is juggling a lot, but it feels cohesive and coherent. And so I would definitely recommend that you watch it. Next, I'd like to talk about some things that go into spoiler territory and some of the themes of the movie. So if you haven't seen it yet, I'd recommend you go and watch it on Netflix, Amazon, wherever you might get your films, and then come back here. Due to excellent planning, I ran out of time to continue filming yesterday, so I am filming the spoiler section today. We'll talk about relevant plot details first, and then get into the nitty-gritty of the themes. The first thing to say is that Gloria doesn't have this connection to the monster, she is the monster. But also Oscar has a big connection to a big sci-fi monster as well. And I won't go into too much detail about it, but it's because of an event that happened when Gloria and Oscar were in the same spot at 8:05 in the morning when they were kids. And so now, when they go back there at that same time, they then reappear as these monsters. The other thing, which I think is slightly more important, is that Oscar is not on Gloria's side in any of this. He harbours this unspoken resentment towards her. We see at the start of the film that Gloria lives in a pretty expensive apartment with her boyfriend, and that she's had quite a successful career up until about a year ago, basically. She goes back to her hometown, which is it's a small town. It's in the middle of nowhere. And whilst Gloria has moved out and, as Oscar says, made something of herself, Oscar hasn't. He's stayed in the town and taken over his dad's bar after his dad passed away. There are lots of scenes throughout the movie where Oscar accuses characters of thinking that they're better than him when they've said nothing to give him that impression, really. And so it becomes clear that this is the way that Oscar thinks of himself, as a failure, basically. And so Oscar starts using this connection that he and Gloria have to start manipulating Gloria and making her stay in the town. That starts by getting her to investigate it and want to know more about what's going on. And then once she wants to leave, he starts threatening her that he's going to hurt other people if she doesn't stay and stop him. If Oscar and his character motivations seem overly simplistic when I'm talking about it, they don't feel that way when you're watching the movie. Colossal spends a lot of time focusing on the way Oscar sees himself and the way Oscar sees other people, and particularly the bitterness he feels towards Gloria and the anger he feels at still being in a small town. Now, with that, let's talk about Jason Sudeikis and his performance as Oscar. Until it's revealed how resentful he is towards Gloria, Oscar is essentially playing a character, and Jason Sudeikis is good at letting those cracks start to appear in that kind of nice, charming facade. And from the beginning, the way Oscar treats Gloria already feels charming, but a little off. He moves from being attentive to overly attentive to possessive and controlling later on. One of the things that really impressed me is the way that Jason Sudeikis plays Oscar when at the start of the movie he feels in control, and by the end of the movie he feels out of control, particularly when he's threatening other characters. When he feels in control and is threatening people like his friends and Gloria and Tim, he is able to be very casual and then move very quickly to being very aggressive with them. And that gives him that sense of control, as if he can control his own emotions very easily, and other people are waiting to see what he does next and fearful of what he does next. By the end of the movie, when Oscar is quite literally in Gloria's grasp and has no leverage over her, he's still as aggressive as he was before, but there's no sense of control with it. And so we don't feel like he's any sort of threat. Now I've seen some criticism of the character of Oscar, that he goes from being a nice guy to being a bad guy very, very quickly and with no explanation, and I don't think this is the case. I think there are clues about his behaviour dotted throughout the movie, and it's not just in his performance, but let's start there. So earlier on in the movie, he seems charming but off, as I said. And one example is when he flies off the handle 15 minutes into the movie, when his friend tries to kiss Gloria, and it's not clear whether he's being protective or possessive, and he goes back to being seemingly a nice guy, but there's already that element of not fully being able to hide his anger. Now, the set design, I think, holds some clues about Oscar's true character, particularly the bar that Oscar owns, that his dad owned. Oscar talks about how he's renovated the bar, but that isn't entirely true. He's renovated a lot of it, but there's a big section that is still the same as when his dad owned it, that he hasn't got round to ever changing. And instead of doing that, he's stuck some stuff up in front. This is another example that's there from the beginning of the movie, that Oscar is not making the effort to change. He's not making the effort to make something better with the bar, but he's still blaming other people for it. He's blaming his dad. I think one thing that can be said is that the film goes from showing you increasingly obvious hints at Oscar's true character to him getting very clearly aggressive. And it's possible that that does ramp up pretty quickly. However, I believed in it whilst I was watching the movie, and looking back on it now, I think it was actually quite well paced. As Gloria starts to figure out more and more what's happening, it makes sense that Oscar would get more and more desperate to hide that from her, and worse at hiding it from her. Now, talking about Oscar's true character leads us into talking about one of the themes of the movie, which is abusive and controlling behaviour. It says a lot about Colossal that it can hold an indie movie and a monster movie and also have this narrative in it, whilst they don't feel like they jar too much with one another. One thing that's important to stress is that this movie is not trying to tell a story of abuse or anything like that. It shows you Oscar's character and how he treats others in an abusive and controlling way. Now, Oscar doesn't only act this way towards Gloria. There are times in the movie when he treats Joel and Garth, who are meant to be his friends, in a similarly controlling way, but the person who's the main target of his controlling behaviour is Gloria. There are a couple of types of abusive behaviour that Oscar displays, or at the very least leans towards during the movie, including psychological abuse and economic abuse. With psychological abuse, that includes things like threats, name-calling, and manipulation, and there are lots of examples throughout the movie of where Oscar does this. One of the most obvious things is when Oscar threatens to go back to the park, back to the spot where Gloria and Oscar turn into these big monsters, and to kill thousands of people. Oscar's aim here is to prevent Gloria from leaving. Another example is that when Gloria and Oscar are working in the same bar, he will often try and get her to have a drink. For instance, in one scene, he puts an open bottle on the table and says, "I'm only being so insistent because I know you want it." Now, some of the examples I'm giving are the more overt ones in the movie, but they show Oscar consistently being manipulative throughout the film. Oscar also uses seemingly harmless behaviour to manipulate Gloria a little bit more subtly. Earlier on in the movie, when Gloria is feeling guilty for accidentally killing people whilst being the monster, Oscar will seem to tell her that it's okay, that it's fine, but later when she's challenging him, he will throw that and what she said to him back in her face, reframing it. Talking about economic abuse in the movie, Oscar gives Gloria a job at the bar that he owns. I saw this as another way Oscar tries to control Gloria, not only being her source of income, but also being able to see her and keep a tab on her when she's at work. She's within eyesight and also she'll be drinking. What's important to note is that, like a lot of people who use abusive or controlling behaviour to manipulate others, Oscar progressively gets worse and worse. He starts off acting in a nice and kind way to make Gloria like him, giving her a job, giving her a TV, giving her a sofa, and it's only after he's done that that he starts to become more controlling. Like I said earlier, this film isn't an abuse story and it doesn't try to be, but instead it shows elements of Oscar's behaviour to show how Oscar controls other people, and it does that really effectively. Now, throughout the movie, we see not just these personal, small-scale situations, but we see them play out on a large scale with the monster movie that's also going on in this. And that really drives home the point about how impactful personal situations can feel. So with that, you have a movie that has a surprising amount of depth and coherence for something which is juggling an indie movie and a monster movie. I hope you found this review interesting. If you have any thoughts about the movie or any thoughts about this video, please comment below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.